Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
So here in Dublin, the talk has moved back to the very thorny issue of Ireland's border with the UK. More on that in a moment. But it's not just here that the threat of new trade barriers is causing concern. Ford's European boss has warned that a no-deal Brexit could cost his company $1 billion a year in tariffs. Speaking exclusively to Channel 4 News, Stephen Armstrong, Ford's boss in Europe, the Middle East and Africa, said that a hard Brexit could be disastrous, and added that if Britain doesn't remain competitive, then Ford could rethink its plans to invest in Britain. So just how would the imposition of duties on imports and exports hit the company? Well, our business editor Siobhan Kennedy has been following the manufacturing of a Ford Fiesta from Dagenham to Cologne.
I am concerned, I'm very worried. It's important that we see a future in the UK that's competitive. A no deal would be a disaster really for not only for my business but for industry in general.
The River Rhine in Germany, the watery backbone of billions of euros worth of trade between Europe and the UK. Here also looms the near-century-old home of Ford Motor Company, a factory so large it has its own train station. Yet there's nothing old about this place. It's high-tech manufacturing at the cutting edge. Decades of deeply integrated supply chains that mean a car can be assembled from scratch in just 3.5 hours. Now Brexit is threatening to turn this finely tuned operation on its head at a huge cost to the company. Show me around.
Okay, look forward to it. I spend at least 4 or 5 hours a week in Brexit-related meetings, and then the team behind the scenes, of course, are working a lot on the implications of it.
There's been much chest beating about Brexit, so the man in charge of all Ford's operations outside America has agreed to let us in, to see for ourselves the dozens of cross-border journeys that go into the manufacture of just one of Ford's best-selling vehicles, the humble Fiesta.
We've spent 40 years putting a supply chain together that uses the kind of open European market, and it would be very difficult for us to quickly unwind them.
You're spending time which is all unproductive on something that you've already got sorted and working perfectly. Yeah,
that's true. So there's not a lot of value add to us, and I don't see significant opportunities exporting outside of Europe either.
To get a real sense of where it all begins, we have to leave Cologne and travel back to Britain to start our journey on another river, the Thames, and Ford's giant factory at Dagenham. It's dawn, and a huge cargo ship has arrived carrying hundreds of brand new cars from Germany.
If you want an example of borderless, friction-free trade, then it doesn't get any bigger or better than this. 2 gigantic vessels arrive here every day carrying thousands of cars from continental Europe into the UK. If Brexit were to put the brakes on that free flow, then it wouldn't just be bad for Ford, it would hurt the entire British economy.
The cars rolling off this mega container have come from the plant in Cologne, but they started out life here on the factory floor. Dagenham produces just over 900,000 diesel engines a year. And for anyone who thinks they come out of a box good to go, take a look at this. A warehouse so vast you need a vehicle to get round it. Thousands of boxes full of components, the majority of which are from Europe.
In front of me here are about a dozen of the more than 2,000 or so components that go into one of these engines. For example, here are valves from Spain. We have clamps and bolts from France. And these are pumps imported from Italy. The point is that right now all these thousands of components pass in and out of the UK with no tariffs whatsoever.
It takes about 2.5 hours for an engine to travel round this assembly line, and 1,800 are produced here on a daily basis. We marked this one as ours. From Dagenham, it's on the boat, then truck. About 2 days later, the engines emerge in Cologne.
All right, these are the engines from Dagenham.
Okay.
In our warehouse, which we get every day, around about 600 engines.
Do you? 600
Yeah.
a day into here?
And you see here, this is
So so ours left Dagenham, and here is our one. Here's our engine, all ready to go into the next stage of the process.
And off it goes into the factory to be assembled. So far, so seamless. But what if we end up with a hard Brexit?
You can really feel the flow of production here. It's constant, and it needs to be, because 1,400 cars come off this production line every single day. All those components from all those different countries. About a third of these Fiestas end up back in the UK. It's a seamless, tariff-free process. But if the UK crashes out of Europe without a deal, then privately, bosses here have calculated it could cost as much as $1 billion in tariffs. Now that's obviously financially crippling for Ford, but it also threatens the future of factories like Dagenham. $1 billion is a lot of money, isn't it, suddenly to have that thrust upon a business?
That is a very large number. Of course, we'll take whatever actions we think we need to take to mitigate that.
Things like what would you mean?
At the end of the day, the decision will be taken based on how competitive the UK is as a place to do business.
Does that mean wholesale moving production of engines somewhere else? Is it lines, or what does it look like?
Well, I think it's too early for me to say that we would shut all our facilities, pick them up and move them, but it would obviously make us question investments in the future.
Of course, a no deal could have an impact on staffing levels as well. Not that he'd mentioned that to the employees of the month gathered here. But isn't all this just posturing to put pressure on the government to get the kind of deal he wants to see? The UK is, after all, Ford's third biggest market globally, after the US and China.
As I said before, we like being in the UK, and I'll do what I can to protect the business there, because it's a great place for us to operate. It's a big market for us. But if it's not competitive, we'll do what we need to do.
We'll do what we need to do. That's more than a veiled threat, but he says the stakes are high.
A no deal would be a disaster really, for not only for my business but for industry in general in the UK. So I don't think no deal is an option that anybody should be happy with or pushing for.
The Christmas markets are just opening in Cologne, but it's the car market here that's lacking festive cheer. Brexit, the unwanted gift they simply can't return.
Well, early this morning here in Dublin, it looked as if a crisis involving the Irish Deputy Prime Minister Francis Fitzgerald might force snap elections. It was the last thing that the Irish public wanted, or that the Irish government needed, in the middle of a crucial Brexit negotiation. In the end, the Deputy PM resigned. The crisis went away, sort of, and with it the need for early elections. This has only emboldened the position of the Irish Prime Minister, Leo Varadkar, who has the support of the EU in preventing Britain from moving to the next stage of Brexit talks about trade unless it can show sufficient progress has been made on the very thorny issue of the Irish border with Northern Ireland. Watch. A small gaggle outside the door of the Irish Parliament, a smattering of cameramen, all here to see if awkward history was about to be made. Would a crisis force the Irish government into a snap election right before Christmas and in the middle of the country's most crucial negotiations in a generation, the ones about Brexit? I'll spare you the details of the crisis, except to say that the woman at the heart of it, the Deputy Prime Minister, that's her, finally agreed to resign, and her boss was able to tell the Chamber that the business of government could plough on.
We have a lot of work to do as a government, not least with phase 1 and phase 2 of the Brexit talks coming up. This country does not need to find itself in a situation whereby we have a caretaker government for 3 or 4 months, potentially during that very important period.
Music to the ears of independent Senator David Norris, one of Ireland's most outspoken politicians when he's not on the show pad. He fully supports the government's position. No trade talks for London until there's a written guarantee that Brexit won't lead to a hard border between Northern Ireland and the Republic. How does it feel to see that role reversal? Ireland is suddenly in a position, because of its solidarity with the rest of Europe, where it can say to London, hang on a minute, this far and no further.
Well, I don't think we relish the power dynamic. I don't think there is a kind of schadenfreude that now we can say to the British, we have you by the ghoulies. No, I don't think we want to do that at all.
Really?
No, I don't think so.
Sweet revenge?
No, I don't think so, because the relationship between Ireland and the rest of the United Kingdom is a very complex one.
As it is in his own family. His English father was decorated by the Queen, who signed this picture. But he is furious about the collateral damage of Brexit for Ireland. If Brexit goes wrong, if the talks are stalled, if we fall off a cliff or whatever the bad scenario
Brexit will go wrong.
But
it cannot.
But do you think the
right.
Irish will get blamed for it?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. There's every signal of that in the British media, and it's very, very regrettable. But just to take up your question, if Brexit goes wrong, it cannot go anything else. It is a disaster. And the gutlessness of the British politicians flabbergasts me.
The bitter irony of all this is, of course, that London and Dublin were getting on famously with each other before the Brexit referendum. The two countries were really warming to each other. The Queen came on a historic state visit to Ireland. And it's perhaps because of this success that people didn't pay enough attention to the potential pitfalls of the northern-southern Irish border issue. Well, now that issue is firmly and squarely on the table, threatening to divide where there had been unity. We met a group of students in the Badass Cafe to chew the fat on Brexit. They were caught between worry about their future and a sense of Irish empowerment.
For so long we've been under the British thumb, and I think finally we're in a position where we can negotiate, given the fact that Brexit, or the British have to kind of adhere to policies that favour them and also favour us and favour them in the EU light as well.
Probably a lot of things that weren't really taken into account at the time of the vote, like people.
But do you think Ireland especially was neglected?
Yeah, I think it was an afterthought completely, especially more so for like the relationship between Northern Ireland and Ireland.
The other irony is that no one anywhere wants a hard border between North and South. But as long as Britain is committed to leaving the European Customs Union, a solution will be hard to find. And the spike that replaced Nelson's column, once blown up by the IRA, will feel like a poke in London's eye. Well, with me now, Gerard Crockwell, an independent senator in the Irish Parliament, and Marina Donoghue, who's from the government's trade and export body, Enterprise Ireland. Welcome to you both. Let me start with you, Marina. How bad is Brexit for Irish business at the moment?
Well, Brexit is certainly causing a lot of uncertainty for Irish companies, but what is important to point out is the UK is our biggest export market for our client companies, representing 35% of exports and 7.55 billion. I'm based in London, and we're certainly seeing companies continue to be committed to the market and continue to look to grow their business on the ground.
So the last thing you need is a hard border between Northern Ireland and the Republic?
I think it's too early to comment on the border. What we're working to do is work with companies to prepare them for the eventualities of Brexit and what that might mean across multiple areas, including suppliers, including their financial situation and resources, for example.
Would that actually potentially mean finding different ways of exporting Irish goods? I mean, going around Britain?
I think there's a couple of ways of looking at it, and what we're looking at is what the different options might be for companies within the UK market, what they need to do to consolidate their position and to grow, and really working with them. I mean, Irish SMEs in Europe are the #1 in Europe for innovation, so there is a great market in the UK for innovation, and we're continually working closely with our clients to support them there.
Okay. Gerard Crockwell, the Taoiseach, Leo Varadkar, has been quite firm in his line that unless there is a written guarantee that there won't be a hard border, there can be no moving on to the next phase of trade talks, and he's backed up by the other 26 EU members. Do you think that's the right line to take?
I think it is. I think we find ourselves in a situation here which we couldn't have predicted. The Good Friday Agreement is the underpinning of all that takes place between the Republic of Ireland and the North of Ireland and the UK. It's a tripartite agreement, and it guarantees that there will be no border, that there will be freedom of movement, that there will be trade between North and South. So if we're to maintain the Good Friday Agreement in its current form, there cannot be a border.
But there is also no solution at the moment to this conundrum of not having a border and also Britain not being part of the customs union. How do you get around that?
Well, I think what you do is you sit down as politicians and you find a political solution, and one of the solutions that has been mooted recently is the notion that we would have a wet border, that is a border down across the Irish Sea. Of course, that would present problems for our colleagues in the Democratic Unionist Party, and that's something that we've got to look at.
Would that make a difference to you, dry border, wet border?
It's too early to comment on the border situation. We're really working hard with companies to understand what the implications might be.
I mean, we heard from Ford, the motor company, in our programme earlier, that for them Brexit potentially means $1 billion a year in losses. Are these the kind of dimensions that some Irish companies are looking at as well?
We're looking at what that might be, and we're also looking at trying to support our companies diversify within the UK and diversify into the Eurozone, and we've launched a strategy to that regard.
Gerard Crockwell, I've heard some of your colleagues say that actually the whole issue of Brexit and the issue of the border moves the prospect of a united Ireland further into the realm of realities. Do you agree with that?
I think that's a possibility. However, I would be somewhat against trying to push that agenda right now. I think what we've got to do is get through Brexit, work with our colleagues in Enterprise Ireland, work with our colleagues in the north of Ireland. But we cannot escape the fact that we share many, many services between the north and the south. And a clear example is Waterways Ireland, with its headquarters in the north of Ireland, runs all of our waterway systems across the 32 counties.
Is there a danger that by taking this fairly hard line with London over trade talks, that you might incur the wrath of your biggest trade partner in this?
Well, I think yesterday I was in Tallinn with COSAC, the EU group, and at that meeting I maintained the Irish government position. England is our greatest friend. Yeah. We do not want a hard deal for England under any...
Doesn't always sound like when you look at some of the papers in London. I mean, they're pointing the finger at you.
Of course they are. And I mean, look, right now, as has been pointed out, we're in the middle of a negotiation. Michel Barnier has taken exactly the same stance as Leo Varadkar in Tallinn yesterday, and that is we solve the Irish problem and then we move on. Now, I know your Foreign Secretary has a different view, that we move to phase two and solve it then.
Okay, well, we'll see what happens. Gerard Crockwell, Marina Donoghue, thank you very much indeed. Well, the controversy carries on in Dublin today and tomorrow, and certainly in the next few weeks. But for now, back to you in London, Catherine.
Thanks, Matt.